Hi everyone, I'm Vivek Muppalla, Director of Synthetic Systems here at Scale, and I'm thrilled to be here today with Natalya Tatarchuk and Eric Rachlin. I want to give a warm welcome to Natasha and Eric. Thank you for joining us on this panel discussion on the business of digital humans, avatars, and AI. Natasha is currently focusing on driving the state-of-art rendering technology, graphics performance, and content creation in her role as a Distinguished Technical Fellow and Chief Architect VP for the Professional Artistry and Graphics Innovation Unit at Unity. Prior to that, she's had a long and distinguished career in the gaming industry. She holds a MS in Computer Science from Harvard University with a focus in computer graphics and BA degrees in Mathematics, Computer Science from Boston University. Eric Rachlin is a New Yorker, computer scientist, and entrepreneur. After getting his PhD at Brown University, Eric was a senior research scientist in Michael Black's Department of Perceiving Systems at MPI in Tübingen, Germany. While at MPI, Eric co-developed software to accurately estimate human shape and pose from 3D scans, images, and video. He commercialized this technology in 2013 as the co-founder and CTO of Body Labs, which was then acquired by Amazon in 2017. At Amazon, Eric was a senior manager of the Body Labs team and later a principal scientist. He left Amazon in 2021 and is now a corporate dropout, pursuing a future startup.
Thanks.
Welcome, both of you. Great to have you. Let's dig into this. So there's a lot of hype around like metaverse, closely tied to that, a lot of topic on like body models, digital humans, and avatars. I'd love to hear from both of y'all what that means for y'all, and we can get going from there. So Natasha, do you want to take us through?
Well, this topic can take up the whole discussion. It's a super exciting topic, and I mean, for what it's worth, this has been around for ages, and I believe we're still quite at the beginning, even though it's exploded in both popularity and penetration and integration and across many industries. And it's a complex topic. It's a topic that is focused to enabled, right? Like I used to work in games, and of course, so many are focused on creation of characters, right? I am a player, I am immersed in my experience, and what kind of player represents who I want to be in that world. And anywhere from trying to find an identity that closely matches my own to taking on completely imaginary identity where I can express features and feats that are not part of my daily experiences. Of course, it's also part of our virtual experience as we get more and more immersed in variety of industries, right? Whether you want to call it metaverse, creatorverse, or just plain old applications, right? Doesn't really matter because you get to participate in it in a, as a digital avatar of your representation. Maybe I am in a clothing store, I'm in Nordstrom, I'm trying on a new dress, right? And how much more important it is for my experience to try it on properly on me versus a standardized model that will disappoint me when I get this dress and find that it completely doesn't suit me. To things like autonomous simulations, right, where it's so critical to represent a range of humans, not just the perfect synthetic 6-foot, males, but the differently abled, the children, you've recently probably seen a robot going through the forest because it got lost. Well, I'm sure not having good simulated avatars was a problem for the training of this robot. So it's pervasive. It is something that is going to enable experiences for us that are more immersive, more accurate, but also more imaginative and creative. And I think it's a critical part of the Web 3D, right? The ability to get to the next level of connectivity for humans to be able to collaborate in a different way. And certainly we've seen that throughout the pandemic, the importance of virtual representation increased a tremendous amount as we're not able to get together in person. Here we are doing this panel virtually.
Absolutely. Yeah, Eric, would love to hear from you too.
That was a great introduction. I mean, like you said, it's so vast what a digital avatar can do. I think that to me, the thing I want to emphasize is it's just part of the ongoing bridge of digitizing the real world and connecting physical world with computers. I mean, we've seen that trend of digitization. It's just ongoing, right? There's the internet bringing all kinds of goods and services online. There's the mobile web making the internet meet us where we are. Fundamentally, we are bodies. I mean, you live in your body, you interact with the world through your body. And the more we can bridge that gap between the physical body and the digital representation of your body. It doesn't need to be one-to-one realistic. It doesn't need to be that there are applications like virtual try-on for sure. It's very exciting. People have been talking about for a long time where you would want something that is reflective of your physical form, maybe a slightly, nicer haircut, but other than that, you want it to fit. Or there's the much more fun, wacky, I want to be like a giant squid and stomp through a city, right? And so, but all of those things involve connecting your physical body with a digital representation of your body and just gluing those worlds together. And the good news, I think, is that, we're seeing a lot of momentum around what both computer graphics and machine learning can do. And so, we've been talking about this for a long time, but I really do feel like discussions like this are starting to become really timely because I think as anyone watching is seeing, wow, the pace of progress of a lot of different pieces of machine learning and computer vision and computer graphics are moving quite fast now. And so I think in a few years, we're going to start to see experiences that are fundamentally elevated from what we've seen in the past. At the same time, there's plenty of people playing games today that have real attachment to their avatars, and we shouldn't be dismissive of that at all. We should look to build and grow on what's worked and then go beyond. And I also like the call out very much to Zoom and web conferences, because now we all are struggling with the pros and cons of having a very digital first representation of ourselves. Hardly an avatar, it's just a camera, but obviously like many people, I wanted to make sure that this was set up in the right way and that I look like I should on camera. And so all of a sudden we're being faced more directly with the question of, what is our digital persona? Right now, it's a flat image still, but that is going to change quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this framing of like blending of the physical and the digital world. I know both of you touched a little bit about the e-commerce topic, and Eric, you've worked a ton in the space. I'd love for you to disambiguate like where things are at, with digital humans in that space. What's hype? What's reality over there? And what you're most excited by the technology, that space right now.
So to me, Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, not going too deep into my background, but, we've all been at this for a long time. And I think there's always been a sense of whatever it is right around the corner. And, fair enough. Like virtual try-on is a great example where there's a lot of love for, I always call out the famous scene in the movie Clueless. Cher is in her closet. It's a very old computer, but she's showing virtual outfits. Everyone loved it. How do we make that happen? I think, though, the good news, the great news is so much of that is coming together. Now, it's always risky to say, no, this is happening tomorrow. But things like the digitization of the world have been hindered a lot because there's been so much manual effort required. People see things, this is, I'm sure, a very informed audience, but people see things like the latest and greatest, Avengers movie or going back to Jurassic Park, and they think, oh, okay, we can just digitize everything. We have motion capture technology. We just but there's a lot of massaging that goes into those to just create that one single view that you see in a movie. At the same time, you have things like video games where there is real control and interactivity, but boy, are a lot of people involved in creating those experiences. So if you want to get my shirt into, into the computer, you can't have a team of people working for weeks on this shirt. There's a lot of shirts out there. There's a lot of people out there. So the scaling piece is really coming from the machine learning's ability to understand the world as is perceived by people, but through things like their eyes, cameras, or other sensors, and infer structure from that. And I think we're seeing so much progress there. It's very exciting. And I also want to just really call out all the enormous momentum I'm sure people are seeing around this sort of language to image technology, right? Oh, I can conjure up with DALL-E and Midjourney these images. Right now, those are flat images. But I think what really is exciting to me is the prospect soon, I mean, I'm talking about in a year or two, where you can start to control and customize avatars with words. And the reason I'm excited about that is because I think it just gives people the knobs they need for I don't want to say a normal person, but just an excited user to really start to customize this technology in all kinds of ways. Whereas before, you can have some very nice, easy to use controls, but there's still things like posing an avatar, defining its appearance, putting on clothing, to say nothing of creating the clothing, just a lot of barriers to entry. And, people have done great with the tools they had. But if for the first time I can just show up and say, you know what? And we're like with TikToks, we see a lot of people don't want to use their own voice. They use digital voices, right? And what we're going to see soon is digital people, right? And you say, okay, I want to be there. I want to do this dance, but I don't actually want to be the one doing the dance. So I'm going to dance around. Or I just want to do the voiceover, right? I want to be on this call, but I don't want to be me for whatever reason right now. I want to be a digital persona. So I think those are going to make real inroads in the next few years. And then that'll kind of merge up with the state of the art in video games and 3D engines, which is incredible. And then, hopefully all the way into VR, AR. So
yeah, makes a ton of sense. I know, and you touched a little bit about the complexity of creating these personas so far, right? And I'd be hard pressed to find someone better than Natasha to talk us through that. I'd love to, for you to talk us through, what are some of the challenges and complexities in creating a digital human pipeline, and where you see some of the breakthroughs in the near future.
It's a complex topic on consumer level, and Eric touched on the desire to enable simplicity, right, in terms of creation. Simplicity. It's funny. I'm sure when we were studying in colleges, right, in mathematics, I'm a computer science degree person, and I remember my advisor asking, well, don't take those writing classes. You're never going to need them in your career. And recently I remembered that and laughed how much of a difference this, wordsmithing will become a method of creation for tomorrow. And, mentioning DALL-E, right? Will it be that the poets will become the better creators than technical artists? What an insane thought that might be, right? To create the 3D representation. But even, taking aside the elements of tomorrow, and a lot of them are starting to happen today, and not just DALL-E, but also, the elements related to some of the more recent papers, and of course advances like GPT-3 and so forth, the advances on conversational AI that will really start being able to create ability to control not perhaps the appearance, but control the experiences of these avatars. But speaking of creation, right now, of course, there are a lot of different pipelines to create content in 3D. And I think I will say the assumption that in the world of digital avatars, there's of course, a sort of more stylistic representation, and you can go all the way down to pixelization, right? Like that's existed for ages. But fundamentally, I think we're kind of in this conversation sitting in a space of 3D representation, some level of immersiveness, stylization in 3D or photoreal, but still some level of shape, right? Representation. And in that world, we have a lot of the complexity that is perhaps hidden by tools that are targeted toward the more non-technical, right? Creators where perhaps I'm doing a customization. This has existed in games, right? From Mass Effects to Destiny to many more, where, you come in and you pick your avatar's hairstyles and you pick what kind of shape of the face it is, or maybe you'll be a robot, right? Or maybe you'll be some other set of constrained choices that the creator of the application has provided. Those are very accessible, right? Like those are, anyone with any modicum of, ability to use the controller will be able to create fairly quickly. But when we look at customization that really is currently targeted at fidelity representative image of you, that is a much more complex and much more technical. This is actually, I think, the crux of it, much more technical workflow that requires right now, by and large, some amount of deeper knowledge of how rigs are represented. There are tools that make it significantly easier, but the challenge in those tools is they typically target a specific application, right? So when we look at the complexity of, hey, I want to create my digital avatar and I want to take it from application to application, that fundamentally needs to exist in a much more comprehensive standard API that currently isn't available on the platforms of today, right? Somewhere perhaps on the OS level. If not on the OS level, something on the level that allows us to copy them as easily as you do a GIF, right now. If I want to take my avatar from, let's say, this application, Riverside, where I'm recording this talk, to my virtual try-on at Nordstrom, to my application where I'm going to go and try out a robot and see how I'm going to work with that. Right now, there isn't a mechanism aside from a config file that runs from one application to another application that perhaps sends in some of my identity and maybe some configuration that I choose to propagate. So there's a conversation about creating avatars that is about truly just representing the identity in a photorealistic, high-fidelity form. And then there's another conversation, which is how do you take this identity across the virtual applications of all types. That currently is a conversation that's just starting out, right? Like we need to engage, and actually both Eric and I are in the Metaverse Forum standards, and there's a lot of conversations related to USD, and a fair amount of conversations with platform holders. How will that be? And then there's a third aspect, right? So I've mentioned the fidelity of representation, the identity bridging across application, and third aspect is scalability. Right now, my avatar is experienced on many different platforms. This moment, I'm running it on a laptop, right? I might take it on my phone. Maybe I want to bring it into Quest. And so the question of how will that configuration of my identity be scalable across a wide range of devices where the constraints of memory, the capabilities of the hardware, is it async GPU compute? Is it tile shared memory? What are the specifics of CPU, cloud, and GPU executions that we will need to figure out in presenting this identity that then can be computed across a range of computational platforms?
Makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I think like the aspect of like realism that you talked about is fairly interesting because we've clearly seen, I think there's been like several demos over the past couple of years where we've seen realistic like characters, but it still seems it's extremely hard for most people to get those like realistic humans created, right? I'm curious where you think the big breakthroughs need to happen for that to become like more pervasive. I guess for 2D images, I think we're already there where you could have these synthetically created humans that are hard to distinguish from like the real humans. But it seems like there's a little bit to go in the 3D world. Would you agree with that? Would love to get your take on that, both of you. Yeah.
I think that's fair. I mean, there are applications that definitely, I mean, heck, they've existed for quite a while to be able to create some of the, again, presets, right? Like I kind of view it as configurators. Whether it is a game configurator, whether it is an external tool, they exist. The photo to my representation, I mean, there's been some incredible advances with Instant NeRF, right? On the ability to scan the whole body, including the complex structure of our hair, et cetera. While it's a tremendous advance, right, it's still going to be, limited in terms of being able to represent dynamism and structural complexity of stacked materials and some of the more advanced representation. The question is, what is it that we want to hit in terms of fidelity, right? Like how, are we really looking like, hey, if I'm representing specular roughness, right, and some of the elements of the, sort of surface level representation were good. But if I'm trying to represent, like I have curly hair, which may not be visible in this background, but if I'm trying to represent, dynamism and, let's say even a shadow and translucency and transparency through that, how we're going to make that easier through the scanning techniques, I think is still a problem that is being decided. However, things that are breakthroughs that I'm personally really excited, there's an excellent paper from Microsoft on 3D face reconstruction from Dance Landmarks. I think that that's a really exciting precursor to a fairly broadly available step function in facial feature tracing and performance capture. There's quite a lot of work that is happening in consumer devices to be able to do performance capture that, again, I think is going to be fundamental to the avatars. In some flavor of capture maybe through Instant NeRF, I think will be a fairly big jump in the ability to get quicker iteration. But I think also, I'll touch on what Eric was saying earlier. I think we do have a fundamental leap waiting for us to connect the simple instruction set to the output, right? Like textual representation to the output. And I'll tell you a funny story. Many, many years ago, I was working with a colleague, Singbin Kang, and a few others in Cambridge Digital World, where we're trying to control, and this is like 2 decades ago, we were trying to control a game with an avatar with exactly this paradigms, right? Smile, the face is supposed to, change the visemes and phonemes to be able to represent in a smiling world. The difficulty is, yes, of course, we can get that, but getting that so you don't sit in the uncanny valley will be the really important space of fundamental research, I think, in being able to do that effectively. In other words, how do you create transitions that are believable? I can create a smile. How am I going to exit out of that smile to the next expression that the person is going to type in?
Yeah, that's a great point because I think the first thing for the motion capture piece, the driving the avatar is so fundamental to what it really means to have an avatar, right? I mean, of course, like we could have an amazing photo of me that was generated synthetically, and that's awesome. Like I could make virtual try-on through a fake Instagram, right? Oh, here's Eric in Paris. Would we really call that an avatar? It might be the building blocks towards an avatar, but I don't think you would. It's really about the combination of identity and presence that you feel. And so in some applications, like a video game, the control and the motion is the critical thing, really. I mean, you like the character. Oh, I like that character. It's me. I played Fortnite a lot. Oh, that's me. But like, it's not you in the physical sense, but you feel connected to it. And so the driving that we're starting to see, I like to call out with the facial capture. Another thing in general, I mean, just a high level point for people interested in this space, typically faces are easier than bodies. So if you want to see where the world is headed in a lot of this tech, start with the face, just look at what the state of the art is for the face. And so we've seen performance capture for faces gets better, and it's still not where it's fully needs to be, but there's some really exciting demos out there and research that's being commercialized. But bodies are harder, and we're making progress there, but just the sensors needed are harder, and there's a lot of challenges there. I think that where I'm watching is where is that combination of technology and economic incentives so that the investments get made. And it's an interesting time because we are seeing, we get glimpses of it now, this heavy investment in VR from these major tech companies, right? The biggest companies in the world are thinking about, behind the scenes. I don't know what they're really doing each day, but what's next, right? So when you expect something like whether it's Meta or Apple or whoever else to come out with some kind of immersive experience, that's going to kind of change the equation as to where people are investing. So I'm just trying to, I think that, just from my own experience using the Quest, I think having a meeting in the Quest is appealing in a lot of ways, but there's also huge barriers. And part of it is just the experience of getting into a VR experience. Part of it is the experience of just you're using your devices for the first time. It's hardly clicking a link to go into a Zoom. And that's really what it needs to be. But once you're in there, as that comes together, a lot of that will be, that technology could be driving a lot of what it means to have a really great immersive avatar. And I think for that, the movement, the motion capture, the performance capture is so important because it's not always appropriate, but you'll talk to a cartoon version of me. I mean, again, if you've gone into the Quest, my main complaint, I don't think anyone's, was like, oh, it looks cartoony. It's like, that's fine, whatever, we're hanging out, but it's got to like work. And when you get all weird because it loses track of you and just a lot of things, you got to be able to navigate as well. I mean, basic things like being able to say, oh, I want to go over there, or, those things need to work. And so I think we'll get there, but I'm waiting to see the investment happen.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, actually, until like very recently, I didn't understand all of the complexities around motion capture. It's such a fascinating and hard to believe how incredibly challenging it is to get like motion captured and take that all the way into like animation and then rig that into the body systems. I don't know, Natasha, would you mind giving like a primer on like how that currently works?
Primer is, well, I mean, it depends how much money we're talking about in terms of capability, right? Like there is the motion capture I have on this device, right? Where I'm talking, I mean, heck, my daughter was doing it this morning when she was doing a FaceTime call and she's motion capturing her face on the Memoji, right? And it worked, right? Like she wasn't completely put off by the experience. In fact, she's 6. She was enthralled, right? Like fantastic engagement in terms of like connectivity. And then there's the other extreme, which is, in our case, when we're as part of the Weta Digital sitting with James Cameron, right? And this is all holds, off trying to do really pinnacle of fidelity motion capture, for example, even as complex motion captures underwater. And the complexities that exist there due to both, the fidelity that you were asking, with being able to not only represent the face and capture sort of some of the core, like where my eyes are, what my mouth is doing, but like the really deep elements of underlying wrinkles, the muscle tone, the volumes that are preserved, and maybe even some of the more complex occluded parts, right? So right now I'm speaking, you guys are not peering into my mouth and what my teeth, tongue, etc. are doing, but yet they're so critical to be able to represent the final motion capture result. And in fact, a lot of the uncanny valley sits in the space of these occluded areas. What is my eyeball doing and how its volume is affecting, both the meniscus and all of the cornea and all of the elements of my eye? How are they going to affect the shape, the underlying representation that is going to be the perception wall? And so when we look at the, the higher fidelity capture, of course, we know and familiar with sort of the light stage, right? Like where you have 50, 60 cameras all blaring lights at you. And there is a range of motion capture for the face that spits out, some amount of 4D data, maybe sets of images, captures your, normal maps, which is, the bumpy representation of the surfaces on your face, perhaps specular data, the color, albedo representation, and then, of course, the motion itself, right? Like how are we going to be able to reconstruct the motion from effectively images? Then there is the marker, body capture suit, where we're going to put on a suit, put some, balls or markers on the face and be able to create an environment where we're tracking this. There are innovative approaches that are also doing markerless capture, both as head-mounted camera, right? Like I have a camera that's been calibrated to the distance, and I'm able to automatically capture, stereo or monocular representation, and then from that reconstruct using computer vision and machine learning techniques, reconstruct the actual both appearance and motion of the particular face. Again, those techniques do tend to focus primarily on non-occluded elements, right? And then you supplement that with deeper simulation and deformation that has simulated, we'll call it rig in technical term, the anatomy structure, the muscular, the dermis, all of the elements of fascia and fat representation of your body, so that you can actually do proper simulation, right, of the occluded elements that aren't going to be captured by the mocap system that is externalized. And then from that, we're going to create representation. This is where also we see a wide variety. Some cases you can do a playback. There's a concept of geometry caches, and literally what you're doing, points in space, playing back per time slice, and you're just playing a movie, right? It'll be a 3D movie, but it's not an interactive experience. While you can do super high fidelity representation, you can't come in and shake a hand of that avatar, right? And then there are other representation where, maybe a neural network was used, like for example, we do with Ziva solutions, where you're actually you're spanning the latent space of all possible deformations that have been captured and trained up and then simulated with a deformation structure. And then you can give inputs to this neural network dynamically. So for example, you could say, hey, I would like you to raise an eyebrow because you encountered a really weird thing in your particular scenario. And instead of having to search for like, hey, find the geometry cache of that eyebrow, play the geometry cache of that eyebrow, you're giving a few inputs, maybe a couple of floats, right, to the neural network that is able to then effectively interpolate within the latent space of all possible deformation, raise the eyebrow, play it back, and engage with you dynamically. And so this is where a lot of the areas of innovation sits, because one, we don't know, like if we talk about immersive avatars, we don't actually know the intent of interaction that is coming from outside, right? Like, Eric just spoke about that. And I think it was so on point, the rules of engagement, right? Like, what does it mean for me as my virtual avatar to move left and right? And what does it mean if I'm going to actually like walk into somebody? I don't know what they're doing. Maybe they're going to walk into me smack on. Maybe there will be a table. We don't know in a virtual world what we will encounter. And unless we're able to encompass, in terms of motion capture, for interactive scenario, and this is different from movies. In movies, you're on a script, you've got storyboard, you're good, you can capture the specifics. Unless we're able to capture the actual latent space of possible interactions, we're not going to get to the immersive world that we're craving, because we won't be able to represent it accurately, and more importantly, dynamically in a constrained memory space, because we don't have heaps of resources that are constantly streaming. Even if you have the cloud, there's still this latency and all the other elements that will make it prohibitive. So I think that that's an important area of deep research that will take us to the next leap. And yes, there are founding technologies that are happening right now. And then there's another area, which is you've captured it, right? Like you've captured what exists. And this was an example that was true story from my life, right? Well, sometimes you've captured an actor, and this was on a game I was working on, and that act, you need to recapture a dialogue or an interaction. And that actor does not have scheduled time. They won't come in because their schedule doesn't allow it. So how do you synthesize data that is correlated to the motion capture, right? That is going to give you believable result to the actor that you've created, the digital avatar, but not with the exact, source. And so I think supplementing motion capture with synthesized data is also another important area of that we need to deliver in order to deliver the end-to-end experience for interactive avatars.
Makes sense. Makes a ton of sense. And I guess we touched a little bit about like the deep learning aspect of creation. There's another aspect which is like blending sort of like the AI systems to add character or like even something like when you're not physically present, you could have automated your avatars. Eric, I'm curious to hear where you see this intersection between advances in AI and how they might combine with the digital humans in the future. What do you see as some of the most exciting applications in the next year, maybe?
Yeah, high level, I think they're absolutely critical enabler. As was just being highlighted, it's you really have to make inferences to just unlock data you don't have, but also be driving a lot of interactions based on this more abstract notion of intent and what's appropriate in a particular situation. There's certainly lots of situations where, you don't know, again, if it's some kind of performance capture, it's not going to be the case that you will perfectly capture what is happening in the real world, nor would you necessarily want to, but it's critical that you make up what you're inferring in the right way. If I'm doing a dance, I want to look like, potentially, it's like a fun, cool dance to the music. If you're hedging your bets based on some kind of least squared error function, you're just going to have me just not look like I'm dancing very well, which maybe I'm not dancing very well, but what's the difference? You don't want to look like someone who can't dance in VR. You want to look like the best version of yourself. So I think that inference is so important and getting this machine learning that can essentially try to see the world or the digital world as the users are seeing it, because that creates those feedback loops where you can say, either through people or ML, let's optimize this rendering pipeline, but let's optimizing it with a literal eye towards what the users are going to see. I think a lot of, I'm trying to think where there's so many potentially exciting applications. In my world, again, I'm very excited about this text to image generation and seeing how those kinds of inferences can lead to just really fast, easy content creation in ways that feel, like they're just going to bring a lot more people to the table, and that will have a big impact on the just the entire state of the space, right? So like if I can go into whether it's VR or something else and just create fun outfits and just decorate the scene. I mean, even forget about for the person, but just if I'm hanging out in a VR room and I can say, let's make this a disco dance party, that's what I want, that's going to create a level of engagement. And then if we can have fun kind of dressing up or whatever, or like we're cracking jokes and we just make some crazy thing happen, or then there's just the much deeper types of productivity tools where you're controlling what's happening in an environment because it suits, the conversation. Oh, I want to have that monitor over here. But then if you're creating a virtual environment, you have to be able to have your avatar interact with that. And so it has to be the case that there's just a lot of intelligent inference going on all the time. I think in the long run, for just, again, most basic examples are going to be like, we set up something very boring, right? A conference room, and there's all these different whiteboards or displays, right? Very boring businessy stuff. But I need to be able to navigate that, right? And I don't want to be navigating by literally walking around my room, which won't match the space. I don't want to be like, some people are very comfortable with game controllers today, and that's great. But even then it's challenging. And a lot of people, of course, will not be. And so whether it's just pointing or saying or hitting a key or clicking on something, but that needs to result in a lot of movement, right? I start talking now. Everyone has to look at me, right? Or else, you don't want there's just a lot of glue that I think is going to need to come together. So that's one piece. And I think, the fun thing is we get to see some previews of this today in the 2D realm, which again, I might not call that a full avatar, but if, a year from now, there's no way you're not going to be able to take your Twitter avatar and just customize it, right? I mean, your Twitter avatar is just a little circle. It's not an immersive 3D thing, but hey, I changed my hair color. I made it purple today because it's whatever, this holiday. So that's great. That's just a foot in the door. So.
Well, and if I could touch actually, because this is such a great, really, really important point that I think I want to really build a stronger understanding. Eric, thank you for jumping into that space, because a lot of times we think, hey, digital avatar, right? And we get really daunted and excited about the actual shape creation and the customization. What do I look like? And the next aspect that I think is super critical that you touched on, which is how will this avatar plug in to the configuration of the application, right? If I use a separate application, right, to create this avatar, it doesn't even know about how will this format come in. Will there be markers that can take, like right now I'm taking a cup. Let's say I didn't author the cup in the same application that I authored my avatar. Will there be a marker on my skeleton on my hand that will be able to connect to the cup and grab it? As simple as that. Those are the problems that are solved when it's the same application and the same avatar and completely untouched elsewhere. So in the example Eric was giving with the conference room, if I have an application where my avatar is created, but then somebody else created this conference room, we need an interface that allows us to have the connectivity so my rig skeleton, right, can sit in a chair, and my cloth colliders and my dress or suit can recognize the collider of the chair and appropriately simulate the cloth deformation against it. So I think this is, again, we need a form of interface to express that, because that will enable, and people are using digital avatars for all sorts of things. Factory simulation, how critical it is not to test things on humans, but to test on virtual individuals where you can see if their injuries will occur. We're seeing those examples. We're seeing car manufacturers using it anywhere for validating product design to validating, crash dummies. And there's so many more examples where, they're simulating buildings for safety, right? We want that to be a really immersive experience, but it needs to come back to that glue. I think it was such an important point.
I love just the simplest thing, like the mug, right? Like you got to be able to drink a cup of coffee in VR, and something needs to happen there, right? And it's not going to be to that point, like you're literally not tracking my hand and where exactly it is on my mug of coffee. It doesn't even make sense to try to do that, but I have to do something. So,
And if you want to enable virtual economy where I am creating, let's say I'm a creator Etsy of the world, right? I'm creating these mugs and I bought this, I think I might have bought this from some creator, third-party creator on Etsy, right? Like, what is it going to mean for them to create it where somebody else is going to sell me the clothing for my avatar and so forth? How do we interconnect this to really create the creatorverse ecosystem, right? That is cohesive.
Right. And there, I think that inference piece of ML is so critical because, we can express the intention and specification of a garment, but to expect that there's just some fundamental format that works for everything all the time, it just doesn't feel realistic to me. There's going to have to be some intelligent glue as well. But it's happening.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think the point about the glue was like is so profound, right? Like it's so simple but so complex, right? That's amazing. Yeah, and on that note, I'd love to hear from both of you. I guess if there's like one or two, applications that you've seen so far that's got you most excited, or you've thought that is like super disruptive and has an actual competitive advantage for the businesses that are using it.
Well, I mean, it's specific to what customers are doing. So I think what we can see, application or not, what I am personally really excited is just to see what people are using digital avatars. And it ranges from, I've seen applications for creating really, inclusive and actually diverse digital assistants, for example. I think there's something so exciting where instead of just, the one sort of representative that, was really tailored to one standard, to being able to create a digital assistant that really connects with me. And I'm seeing customers trying to create that range of options, right, that become a lot more customized. We're seeing, like I was saying to you, there's a ton of architecture and industrial applications that are really being thoughtful about how do we ensure, one, both for cost savings, of course, but also for human safety, right? Like, how do we better plan cities for traffic patterns? How do we better plan cities or buildings for, if there's a fire and smoke, for better exit routes? And using avatars in order to be able to simulate that, I think is actually, like, as a human being, I think this is a wonderful thing, not just cost saving to the applications creators, which is important. And then, of course, obviously, like, I'm a gamer, so for me, of course, a huge range of avatar fidelity jumps and just options of being able to represent huge variety of individuals and options. Like, when I look at everything that's happening in games and avatar customization, it's mind-blowing how much further we are than we were 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, those seem like great answers. I mean, just to add to it slightly and kind of dovetail, I think, just looking for those things where it's kind of, you're saying there's just a little bit of a wedge being created in a market that wasn't there before. I'm seeing these digital avatars, just talking heads. And, that's not the world's most exciting application today. It's cool. But I see a company, for example, a startup I've been watching, Synthesia, I believe is how you say their name. They're all of a sudden I can just script out words and have someone say it, a digital human. And that's really interesting because I think it is very practical and people will use it. A lot of times you want to make a video and you don't want to film yourself for like a host of reasons, or just diversity concerns as well. Like, you just don't want to go and try to get an actor for like 100 global markets. So, there's a lot of interesting use cases there. And the other kind of foot in the door thing, just to call it out, virtual try-on has a rich history of false starts. So I don't want to say that's the next big thing. But something that's kind of intriguing to me that I've seen inklings of, just demos, is like the fact that we're starting to be able to see synthetically generated garments. So I can be like text to a dress, right? I can make up dresses now with words. They're not perfect, just to be clear, but we're starting to see that. Being able to try on a garment that doesn't yet exist is an interesting application, because you definitely cannot do that until the garment exists. So I can see something in that space happening. And then in video games, I mean, for sure, it's like, oh, I just want to make up a fun outfit or just customize my outfit. So I think that's a really exciting application that with the text to graphics tech, we'll see a lot more of in the next year, I would say.
But I want to touch, if I can have 1 minute, on something that I think we all have responsibility on as we focus more and more driving the digital avatar forward, which is there's been a ton of AI and deep learning techniques that allow us to create better fakes. We need to actually upfront think about what are the mechanisms we're going to put in place to be able to denote abuse, right? Somebody's creating an avatar of somebody else. We're going to be able to distinguish between real and fake identity. We're going to not encompass the biases that exist in the data, right? Like if we're going to take in, we all see the results of taking in the OpenAI data for GPT-3 and the biases that propagates from the source. How are we going to be able to do that? So I think that that's an important call, how we're going to protect the children and privacy, right? Like in the world of these flexible tools. I think that's a critical responsibility for any of us working in this field.
And thanks for calling that out. I totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a fantastic point, and almost like Natasha, we're going to have you sign up for one more talk on a deeper, more interesting conversation on that note.
The real unsolvable problems.
Yeah. This has been fantastic. I loved chatting with the both of you. Learned a ton. If I might have 1 minute, I do have one last question, which this is such a fascinating space, right? At the intersection of like software engineering, graphics, and AI. What advice you might have for anyone who wants to get started in this field?
I have a very simple advice, and I use it a lot with my teams. Perfect is the enemy of shipping. Shipping is perfect. Just do it, right? I mean, it's where it all sits. We're not going to solve it perfectly. We're not going to solve all the aspects, but every step along the way, we make improvements.
I can't do better than that. I think this is a perfect time to dive in. And it's easy to look at what happened in the last 10 years and think, oh, I wasn't a part of any of that. But I guarantee 5 years from now, no one is going to be thinking about what happened in the last 10 years. They're going to be thinking about what happened 2-3 years from now. So before you know it, if you're doing what Natasha was suggesting, you will be right there in the thick of things. So go for it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks a ton, both of you.
Thanks.